There are places so far from human memory they seem untouched by time. Blackstone Grove was one of them, thick with ancient cottonwoods and willow-choked marshes. It sat low in a forgotten basin, wrapped in a belt of hills that no road crossed. The sun filtered in only where it could find cracks in the canopy. The rest remained drenched in shadow, where silence carried weight and even the insects clicked in whispers. It was a forest that did not welcome noise or mercy. But mercy, strange and fragile, came anyway. At dawn, light barely reached the river's edge. The Blackstone River, thick, slow, always murmuring to itself, slithered between gnarled roots and fallen logs, carving its way through the woods like a restless spirit. On its banks, huddled between clumps of damp sedge, lay 3 kittens, no more than 3 weeks old. Half their faces were still cloaked in the innocence of unopened eyes, their ribs pressed against paper-thin skin. Their cries had dried up sometime the night before, replaced by the quiet horror of waiting. Their mother was gone, not eaten, not dragged away, simply gone. There had been a storm 2 nights ago. Lightning had split the air like a scream. Rain poured for hours, relentless and heavy, flooding burrows and flattening nests. By morning, the forest wore the scent of washed-out sorrow, and the kittens, once nested beneath a hollowed cypress, were alone, the scent of their mother swept away, replaced by mud and confusion. One of them still tried to nurse from her sister's ear. Another simply stared at the river, eyes wide but unfocused, as though it might bring back what the storm had taken. The forest knew their time was measured in hours now. The cold crept in fast this far downriver. Predators knew the sound of weakness. Even insects began their circling, as if sensing the stillness to come. But then the rhythm changed. At first it was nothing, just a whisper of disturbed leaves, the faint snap of a twig somewhere beyond the brambles. Then silence again, then movement, low to the ground, fluid, deliberate, the kind of movement the forest doesn't question because it's old, ancient. A shadow emerged. She stepped out from behind a splintered trunk, her shoulders narrow but muscular, her coat a dusty blend of ash and bronze, dark rosettes faded from sun and age. Her ears twitched as she surveyed the clearing. Her steps made no sound. She was a wild bobcat, lean, alert, and not young. Her tail flicked once, twitching like a question mark. And for a long moment, she stood perfectly still, watching the 3 bundles of fur by the river's edge. Her nose wrinkled, testing the air. They were no threat, not prey either, not exactly, but something about them held her gaze. She took a step forward. Then another. The oldest kitten flinched, releasing a hoarse mewl that sounded like a breath cracking in half. The bobcat's ears turned toward the sound. She remembered a cry like that, once, many moons ago, before the rockslide, before the aching emptiness of nights spent prowling alone. She had known the shape of tiny warmth pressed against her side. She had known the scent of milk-heavy breath, of fur that had never touched rain. But that had been taken from her. A sudden shift of earth, a sound like thunder, and then silence. That silence had followed her ever since. Until now. The bobcat crept closer, her tail lowered, her eyes narrowed, not in aggression but in thought. The smallest kitten blinked slowly and reached one trembling paw forward. It was not begging, not calling, just reaching, blind and instinctive, for warmth. And the bobcat did something no predator should have done. She lay down, right there, a breath away from the orphaned kittens. She folded her paws beneath her chest and settled into the dirt. Her side rose and fell in long, measured rhythms. She made no sound, gave no signal, but her stillness spoke. The forest listened. The kittens hesitated, trembling. Then the largest one, gray with faint stripes, dragged himself forward, clumsily crawling over her paw. He burrowed into the hollow beneath her chest and let out a single, shaking sigh. The others followed. By nightfall, the bobcat had groomed their ears with slow sandpaper licks. She hadn't eaten that day, nor would she the next. She brought them a beetle, then a vole. She watched them sleep and stared out at the forest like a sentry daring the shadows to move. and for the first time in many nights, her heart beat with something like purpose. But Blackstone Grove did not forget its laws. And mercy, while beautiful, always came at a cost. 2 ridges away, something else stirred beneath the mud. A creature built low and armored, her back carved from centuries of instinct. She too had known the pull of motherhood. She too had built a nest for her young, buried deep under sand and moss, tucked beside a silent bend in the river. She was a crocodile, and she was nearing the end. Her belly scraped the bank as she moved, every motion labored, every step dragging. Her jaws had not opened in 3 days. Her eggs, dozens of them, lay hidden beneath a mound of dry grass, each one filled with life, beating silently beneath a hard shell. But the storm had not been kind to her either, and as night fell again, the forest paused. One mother had found her children, another would never meet hers, and the river, ancient and watching, continued its slow, deliberate song. The sun rose late over the eastern ridge, sluggish and pale, as though the forest itself was too tired to welcome it. Mist clung to the lowlands like sorrow that refused to lift. Beneath the canopy, the aftermath of the storm had settled in eerie stillness. The air tasted of scorched bark and wet ash. Beyond the river bend, 2 hills south of where the Bobcat now lay curled around her adopted litter, the marsh deepened into swamp, dark, mosquito-laced and silent. It was there, half buried beneath reeds and dry grasses, that the crocodile had made her nest. She had come weeks ago, dragging her massive frame up the slope after mating season had passed. Her belly had bulged, slow and heavy, and the sounds of her hissing breath had echoed through the mangroves like a warning, a sentinel of the ancient marsh. She had been old, not ancient but no longer swift. The scars across her snout were thick and white, healed by time and teeth. Her right eye was clouded. Her left front leg moved with a limp, damage from a brutal fight with a male seasons earlier. But she had found her patch of soil, high ground surrounded by black water, a place few dared wander. 32 eggs, each buried with care, packed under a layer of warm vegetation. She had spent every day since guarding the mound, rarely leaving even to hunt. Hunger gnawed at her bones, but instinct overrode it. She barely blinked, resting with one eye open, breathing with the stillness of stone. Somewhere beneath that crust of moss and sand, her young stirred. Then came the lightning. It struck without warning, a fork of raw energy, white and cruel, that split the heart of a dead pine tree half a mile from the nest. But the fire it birthed didn't stay. Crawled. The winds, still bitter from the passing storm, pushed the flames down into the dry marsh grass, feeding it with oxygen and debris. By nightfall, a wall of fire swept low along the edge of the swamp, licking at trunks and devouring nests. Frogs screamed, birds abandoned their chicks, and the crocodile, slow, unyielding, furious, rose from her nest and faced it. She tried to shield the eggs. Her body curved around the mound, low and wide. She hissed at the flames as though she could drive them back with sound alone. Sparks clung to her scales. Smoke filled her lungs. But she did not move. The fire didn't roar. It whispered. It smothered. It stole air and heat and breath. And when it reached the nest, it kept moving. No drama. No explosion. Just a gentle crackle, and a mother who stopped breathing. When the fire passed, all that remained was blackened earth and silence. The eggs did not scream. They did not cry. They simply endured. Days passed. Rain returned, brief and light. The forest cooled again the way it always did after trauma. But nothing stirred in the old nesting ground. The crocodile's carcass lay still, her mouth partially open, as though she had tried to speak before she died. Charred ferns grew damp again. Ash turned to sludge. Her tail, once a weapon, lay limp like a fallen branch. But then, one morning, something cracked. It was a sound too small to notice. A flick against the inside of a shell. Then another. A soft, muffled tapping. The heat had nearly killed them. But it had also accelerated something. The shells were ready. Life inside them moved. One by one, for eggs began to hatch. The first to emerge was weak. Its snout poked through the blackened top, caked in soot, nostrils flaring as if smelling fire. Its skin was damp and gray, striped faintly like shadows. It chirped, loud for its size, and flailed into the airless nest. The second followed minutes later, stronger, eyes open. It pushed with its tiny claws, wriggled free of broken shell, and lay atop its sibling, panting. The third was slower. The shell cracked unevenly. It bled slightly from the nose. But it lived. The fourth didn't move at first. Then, with one last roll, it opened, and something alive blinked back at the dead sky. But the nest was no place for newborns now. The heat still rose from the earth. No mother to cover them. No shade. No guidance. Just the memory of her body and the scorched husk she'd left behind. They cried, thin, piercing cries, sharp and shrill like bird calls. Lost. Vulnerable. Something heard. She came like smoke through the trees. The bobcat, who had wandered further from her den than usual that morning, picked up the sound just beyond a patch of moss-covered roots. It was unfamiliar. It wasn't prey. It wasn't danger either. But it was urgent. She stepped lightly over burnt logs, her kittens tucked safely under a thicket upstream. She crept forward, muscles tense, ears angled forward. Her eyes, sharp with wild memory, narrowed at the scene before her. Charred earth, a destroyed nest, and 4 hatchlings gasping in the remains of their beginning. They were so unlike her own young. Their skin was wet and scaled, their legs awkward, their heads too large for their bodies. But their cries were unmistakable. They were calling. She didn't go to them. Not at first. She circled the nest once, twice. Her nose twitched at the scent of death. The adult crocodile lay only feet away, unmoving. Her eye, clouded even in death, stared blankly through the trees. The fallen queen. The bobcat padded toward the eggshells. She sniffed the ground. Her instincts fought against her. This was wrong. This wasn't her place. This wasn't her kind. But something in the hatchling's movements stirred a reflex deeper than reason. They chirped again, the smallest one crawling toward her shadow. She stepped back, then, slowly, lowered herself. She lay beside the ash mound, her head tilted, watching. The hatchlings crawled closer. One nestled against her leg, its body still warm from hatching. Another flopped over her paw, breathing shallow but steady. She didn't move. She didn't understand what she was doing. But she stayed. That night, she didn't return to her den. She curled herself around for Crocodile. Hatchlings in the place where fire had taken their mother, and watched the stars return to the sky, one by one. In Blackstone Grove, the unthinkable had happened once again. A predator had chosen to love something she should have killed. And the forest, still grieving from fire, listened with reverence. Time in Blackstone Grove did not pass by clocks or calendars. It passed by the soft rise of mist in the morning and the way light slanted through trees at dusk. It passed in the breath of wind across leaves, in the hush of the river when the frogs paused between songs. But for those who had lost something, or found something they never expected, time bent and stretched strangely. The bobcat knew this. Her days were no longer her own. She had become a guardian to 6 lives, none of whom had come from her body. 3 kittens, now stronger, sharper, full of questions. Their coats had fluffed out. Their mews had become playful chirps, and their once clumsy paws now darted after dragonflies and grasshoppers in bursts of glee. And the crocodile hatchlings, for strange, scaled siblings who followed their feline guardian with slow, swaying motions, their bodies still awkward, their instincts unsure. They basked where she basked. They responded to her growls with tiny chirps and flattened postures. One even curled beside her on cold nights, resting its heavy head against the warmth of her flank. She didn't lick them. She couldn't groom scales. But she watched them with the same vigilance, the same low growl in her throat whenever something moved in the underbrush. And something was moving. She noticed it first during the 3rd week, when the mornings grew warmer and the air more humid, when frogs sang earlier and the river slowed into a green crawl. It was the silence that gave it away. A break in the pattern. The thrush that always chirped at dawn had gone. The water vole trail had gone cold. Her hunting grounds felt watched. First she thought it was nothing. Perhaps the marsh shifting, or her own nerves, worn thin by the demands of 6 mouths and a dozen dangers. But the scent confirmed it days later. Faint, sharp, musky, wrong. A fisher. She hadn't seen one in 2 seasons, and even then only once. A flash of dark fur and sharp teeth vanishing into the brush. Fishers were elusive, solitary, fierce, and deadly. They hunted rabbits, squirrels, even lynx cubs when desperate. And now one was here. It had found her trail. She doubled back that afternoon, carrying a vole for the kittens, and found prints in the mud. Not her own. Not otter. Not fox. These were heavier, deliberate, and wide. The claws didn't show it was stepping carefully. Following. She turned her eyes toward the canopy, ears twitching. The trees were thick with moss and fog, their branches low and concealing. The fisher could be anywhere, or nowhere, but the tension in her muscles remained long after the prints disappeared. That night she didn't sleep. She kept the kittens close. The hatchlings, now more mobile, rested near the water's edge under a driftwood overhang. She curled around all of them, her ears pivoting at every cricket chirp, every frog leap. By morning, one of the hatchlings had wandered. Not far, just 20 steps toward the reeds. But enough. When she found him, he was chirping in distress, tangled in vines and coated in leeches. She freed him with her teeth, growling softly, and carried him back to the nest. But something in the clearing made her pause. A mark on the tree trunk. Fresh. 3 claw slashes. High. Too high for badger or raccoon. The fisher was closer now. Her blood turned cold. For days, the tension escalated. The kittens no longer strayed far. The hatchlings moved less. The forest quieted. And then, just after dusk on the 5th day, the silence shattered. It started with a screech, not hers. Not any of the young. A sound of impact. A body hitting the underbrush. Then snapping twigs. Then a cry. She leapt over the log in 3 bounds. The youngest crocodile hatchling had been dragged halfway down the bank. His hind legs kicked. Mud flew in all directions. Behind it, teeth bared, eyes glowing, body slick and angular, stood the fisher. Its jaws clamped around the hatchling's back. The predator had waited for this moment. For one to stray. For one to be vulnerable. It didn't know the hatchling was unlike any prey it had known. It didn't know this one had a mother. The bobcat struck without a sound. She didn't snarl. She didn't hesitate. She exploded from the shadows with a leap born of pure, ancient fury. Her claws tore across the fisher's face, sending fur and blood flying. The predator dropped the hatchling and rolled, lashing out with hooked claws of its own. They fought in the mud, teeth sinking into flesh, screams echoing through the trees. The fisher struck her ribs. She slammed her head into its jaw. They rolled again, crashing into reeds and snapping stems. One of the kittens tried to follow. The others cried out. Then, suddenly, the fisher tore free and fled, bleeding, half-blinded, its back leg dragging behind it. The forest swallowed it whole. Silence returned, shattered and twitching. The bobcat stood trembling, blood dripping from her shoulder, her breath ragged. She turned and limped to the crocodile hatchling, curled now in the mud, panting, alive. She nudged it gently, then picked it up and returned to the den. That night no one slept. She curled tighter than ever, wrapping her body around them all. Her pain was sharp, but sharper still was the resolve growing inside her. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about defiance, about rewriting the laws of the forest that had taken too much from her. She would not lose them, not this time. The air changed before the sky did. Birds stopped singing. Insects vanished into roots. The frogs, usually loudest at dusk, fell mute. The trees, heavy with moisture, creaked as if something ancient had shifted. And the bobcat, resting beneath the roots of the oak with her strange brood nestled against her side, raised her head sharply. She knew. Somewhere far upstream, beyond the ridges and the tangled lowlands, the clouds had gathered in black silence. The heat had been swelling for days, thick as syrup and hard to breathe. The forest had worn it like a warning, one that now thundered through the air in low, rolling growls. The river changed first. It always did. At mid-morning, the Blackstone's slow green creep began to churn. Not violently, not yet, but with unease. It murmured against its banks, swirling debris that had slept in the mud for weeks. Water beetles scrambled for rocks. A turtle, half buried in sand, lifted its head and moved toward higher ground. The bobcat stood slowly. The crocodile hatchlings were sunning on a flat rock, their soft eyes blinking at the shifting light. The kittens, curled beneath a patch of shadebrush, blinked at her movement. One mewled. The smallest crocodile let out a dry chirp. She scanned the trees. The winds were beginning to arrive. Slow, spiraling gusts that bent branches just enough to whisper fear. By dusk, the wind howled. The sky split in half. The rain returned like it had weeks before, but heavier, angrier. It came in waves that slammed against leaves and poured through branches like waterfalls. The riverbanks, already loose from the last flood, gave way. Roots snapped. Entire tree limbs crashed into the current. Mud turned to soup. The bobcat dragged her kittens to higher ground, mouth full of fur and urgency. They whimpered, confused. She placed them in a hollow above the slope, beneath a jutting rock. Safe, protected. She turned back for the hatchlings. They were still at the river's edge, frantic now, spinning in circles, trying to crawl toward her. The smallest slipped into the current. She ran. The water had risen fast, too fast. It now churned where there had been dry land an hour ago. One hatchling was already half submerged, its cries drowned by the rushing flood. Another tried to claw at a clump of reeds and failed. The third was huddled under the driftwood overhang, paralyzed. And the fourth gone. The bobcat didn't think. She leapt into the water. It slammed against her body, pulling her sideways. The taste of mud and decay filled her mouth. But her eyes locked onto the struggling hatchling. She fought the current like an animal possessed. Her claws ripped into the riverbed. She caught the hatchling by the neck, pulled, slipped, surged again, and dragged it to the embankment. She dropped it on the moss above and went back. The second one had been pinned under a log. Its tiny tail flailed. The current battered it against the bark. She launched herself forward, slammed into the log with her shoulder, and shoved it free. The hatchling tumbled into the flow. She grabbed it mid-fall, her jaw locked tight. She turned, slipping once more, dragging both their lives from the mouth of the river. Too safe. She scanned. The third hatchling, the one that had been beneath the overhang, was gone. A scream ripped through her throat. She followed scent, movement, memory. Then she saw it. Half buried in debris, barely floating, eyes closed. She dove again. This time the river pulled her under. Her limbs flailed. A branch sliced across her flank. But she surfaced, gasping, and reached the body. It wasn't moving. She bit down gently and thrashed toward the bank, where the others waited, huddled in a shaking pile of scale and fur. She climbed the slope with bloodied paws, the limp hatchling in her teeth. She laid him down beside the others, nudged him. No response. She licked his face once, then again. Still nothing. The kittens watched, silent. The other two crocodiles chirped softly, nudging their brother. Then, a twitch, a flutter of limbs, a shudder. The small chest rose. A cough. He blinked. The bobcat exhaled. She didn't know what a miracle was, but the forest did. It had given her this moment. By midnight, the rain slowed. The river had claimed most of the lowlands. Trees had fallen. Dens had vanished. But under the overhang, soaked and exhausted, lay one mother, 3 kittens, and 4 crocodile babies. They slept in a tangle of opposites, in a nest of fur and scales. And above them, the moon returned, slicing through clouds like a silver knife. Days passed, then weeks. The forest healed as it always did. The kittens grew. the hatchlings too. One day, the bobcat rose before dawn and watched the crocodiles slide into the water without looking back. She didn't follow. They had learned. Later that season, the kittens would hunt on their own, wild and ready. They'd carry her scent in their bones, but they would not stay. She remained, a lone bobcat in the grove, once broken by loss, now whole in a way the forest had never seen before.